Whether someone wants to run around the block or qualify for the Boston Marathon, how he or she trains can have a dramatic effect on his or her performance. While running just to run will certainly make a person fitter, understanding all the training components and putting them together in a systematic training plan gives him or her the blueprint for success. It's the difference between building a house by placing bricks here and there and having a blueprint laid out beforehand. As New York Yankees catcher Yogi Berra once said, "If you don't know where you're going, you might not get there." The ways in which runners adapt to training is a matter of physiological economics, supply and demand. Evolution has given humans an exceptional ability to adapt. Our body's structures and functions match the demands we place on them. If we increase the demand, we increase the amount of change that takes place to keep pace with the increased demand. It's just like the real estate business. The more people who want to move to a specific town, the more houses and apartment buildings are built in that town to accommodate the people moving there. Los Angeles has more housing than Los Alamos because the demand for places to live is greater in Los Angeles. Running creates a strong demand, and as a result, it creates the forum for change. To be better runners, training needs specificity and people need to run. Riding a bike won't help someone become a better runner any more than running will help someone become a better cyclist. The movement patterns of the two activities are completely different and therefore differ in their motor unit, recruitment patterns, and the muscle's ability to produce force. For example, cyclists, due to their pronounced flex posture at the hip joint, move their hip flexors and quadriceps muscles at short lengths, while runners, due to their upright posture, move their hip flexors and quadriceps muscles at long length. The chronic use of these muscles at different lengths during these different activities results in different relationships between muscle length and the force they can produce at those lengths. While training movement certainly needs to be specific, the specificity of training principle that we hear so much about in the fitness industry doesn't always apply in an endurance sport like running, especially when it comes to speed of movement. That's because endurance sports are volume-based, so they require a large volume of work performed slower than race pace. While it may seem logical to run at 5K race pace as often as possible to get faster for a 5K, it's not the best or even a good way to improve 5K time. Most runners do arbitrary workouts without having a systematic, progressive plan, and they do workouts at suboptimal, as in not the ideal speeds because they don't understand the purpose of the workouts. Training concepts to consider for optimal running training concept #1. To run fast, runners must first spend a lot of time running slow. Some readers may remember watching the TV sitcom, I Love Lucy. Lucille Ball was one in a million. There was a famous episode during which Lucy and her friend Ethel work at an assembly line, where they were assigned to wrap pieces of chocolate as they came down the conveyor belt. At first, the job was easy. The chocolate pieces were coming down the belt at a slow enough speed that Lucy and Ethel could easily grab each piece of chocolate and wrap it. Then the speed of the conveyor belt quickened, and Lucy and Ethel had their hands full. Literally, they couldn't wrap each piece of chocolate in time before the next piece was already passing them, so they grabbed handfuls of chocolate and shoved them in their pockets and in their mouths. It was hilarious, and that episode became a famous part of TV history. Little did the director of that scene know that he revealed the secret to how to become a better distance runner. Clearly, increasing the speed of the conveyor belt didn't work. Lucy and Ethel couldn't keep up with the pace of the belt. If the company that Lucy and Ethel worked for wanted to produce more wrapped chocolates in less time, they should have had more factories with more assembly lines and more workers like Lucy and Ethel wrapping chocolates coming down the multiple conveyor belts. Deep inside of muscle fibers, those factories are the mitochondria, and those workers, the Lucys and Ethels, are the enzymes that catalyze the chemical reactions involved in aerobic metabolism. The more mitochondria a runner's muscles have, the greater their muscles' capacity to use oxygen and the faster pace they will be able to sustain. The most efficient way to make more mitochondria, more factories, more assembly lines, and more workers, is to run more. And to run more, runners must slow down their runs because there is an inverse relationship between training intensity and duration. The faster one runs, the lower the total amount he or she can run. The number and size of mitochondria in the muscle fibers is sensitive to the volume of work performed. When the factories are stressed because of greater demand, more and larger factories will be built to increase their supply to match the demand. If those pieces of chocolate kept coming down the conveyor belt long after the thirdum, in it I Love Lucy episode was over, more conveyor belts, and more and larger factories to hold those conveyor belts, would have been built to keep up with the demand for chocolate. One of the biggest mistakes runners make is thinking that to run faster in races, they need to run faster in workouts. So they run their workouts faster than their current fitness level dictates. I once coached a college runner who ran 19 minutes for 5K, and she told me she wanted to be trained like a 35K runner, so I told her to run a 35K, and then I'll train her like a 35K runner. Races which tell a runner his or her current level of fitness dictate the training speeds, not the other way around. Distance runners don't do workouts to practice running faster. They do workouts to improve the physiological characteristics, to make more assembly lines that will enable them to run faster in the future, even if it's not as funny as the I Love Lucy chocolate episode. Concept #2, Train Smarter Concept #3, easy runs must be easy. The single biggest mistake runners make is running too fast on their easy days. By doing so, they add unnecessary stress to their legs without any extra benefit, and they won't be able to run as much quality on their harder days. Since many of the cellular adaptations associated with aerobic training are volume-dependent, not intensity-dependent, the speed of easy runs is not as important as their duration. Slowing down the easy runs has at least 3 benefits. 1. It decreases the chance of injury. 2. It allows runners to get more out of their harder days because there will be less residual fatigue. And 3. It allows runners to increase their overall weekly mileage. Concept #4. Time is more important than miles. Beginning in the 7th grade, I became fascinated with time, specifically how fast it moves, and how each year seems to go faster than the previous year. Time spent running is also interesting. The second half of runs always seem to go faster than the first half, and some runs seem to fly by while others seem to drag on. This changing perception of time may be partly explained by its relationship to effort, as running philosopher Dr. George Sheehan once noted, "The faster we run, the longer it takes." As runners and coaches, we think a lot about mileage. Indeed, it's the number of miles run each week that often defines our status as runners. The more miles run, the more we're validated. However, the amount of time spent running is more important than the number of miles, since it's the duration of effort time spent running that the runner's body senses. A faster runner will cover the same amount of distance in less time than a slower runner, or, to put it another way, will cover more miles in the same amount of time. For example, a runner who average is 7-minute mile pace for 40 miles per week is running the same amount of time as a runner who average is 10-minute mile pace for 28 miles per week, and therefore is experiencing the same amount of stress. And that's what matters, the stress. The slower runner may be running fewer miles, but the time spent running, and therefore the stimulus for adaptation, is the same. If a slower runner tries to run as much as a faster runner, the slower runner will experience more stress and therefore puts himself or herself at a greater risk for injury. The duration of effort is one of the key factors that arouse the biological signal to elicit adaptations that will ultimately lead to improvements in your running performance. Focusing on time rather than on distance is a better method for equating the amount of stress between runners of different abilities. Your body has no comprehension of what a mile is. It only knows how hard it's working and how long it's working. Effort over time, same goes for individual workouts as well as mileage. This is the biggest flaw of group training, during which everyone in the group runs the same workout. A slower runner should not attempt the same number of reps of the same distance in an interval workout as a faster runner. Otherwise, he or she will experience more stress because he or she will be spending more time running at the same relative intensity. For example, an 18.05K runner who runs 5x 1,000 meters at 5K race pace will experience more stress than a 15.35K runner who does the same workout. The corresponding times of the two workouts would be 3:37 per 1,000 meters and 3:7 per 1,000 meters, respectively. For this workout, the slower runner would be running 30 seconds longer at the same relative intensity as the faster runner. To make these two workouts more comparable, and therefore to equate the stress experienced by both runners, the 18.05K runner should modify the workout by running 850 meters rather than running 1,000 meters. If 850 meters is too awkward of a distance to determine, you can run either 800 or 900 meters, or do the workout by time instead of by distance. The point is to make the two workouts more comparable by shortening the distance for the slower runner, or conversely, by increasing the distance for the faster runner. There are a couple of other ways to make these two workouts comparable. The 18.05K runner can decrease the number of reps or increase the duration of the recovery interval. For example, if both runners run the same distance and the 35K runner does 5 reps, the 5K runner should do 4 reps. Alternatively, if the 35K runner takes 3 minutes of recovery between reps, giving a work-to-rest ratio of 1:1, the 5K runner should take 3.5 minutes of recovery to make the work-to-rest ratio 1:1. While manipulating the number of reps or the recovery intervals will make the two workouts more comparable between runners, the best way to equate the stress between these two workouts is the initial way described: shorten the length of the reps, since the time spent running at a specific intensity represents the greatest aspect of the training stress. If the 5K runner runs 1,000-meter reps like the 35K runner but takes more recovery to keep the work-to-rest ratio the same, it's still a harder workout for the 0 runner. To equate the stress of workouts between runners of different abilities, I have developed a hierarchy of strategies. 1. Decrease the length of each rep for slower runners, or increase the length of each rep for faster runners to make the duration of each rep the same between runners. 2. Decrease the number of reps for slower runners, or increase the number of reps for faster runners to make the total time spent running at a specific intensity the same. 3. Increase the duration of the recovery interval for slower runners, or decrease the duration of the recovery interval for faster runners to make the work-to-rest ratio the same. Concept #5, fatigue is more important than the number of reps. Nearly all coach is prescribed and nearly all runners perform a specific number of reps for interval workouts, with that number decided before the workout begins. However, the number of reps is not all that important and is usually an arbitrary decision. There's no magic in doing 5 or 6 or 10 reps. Especially in the context of group or team training, it is not optimal for everyone to run the same number of reps. What is important is causing fatigue during the workout, because fatigue is what your body responds and adapts to. Some runners may fatigue after 4 reps, some after 8, and some after 11. Do as many reps as it takes to cause a sufficient amount of fatigue on that day, until you feel that you couldn't do another rep without catastrophic physiological events occurring in less scientific terms. Stop the workout before you throw up or collapse from heat exhaustion. Workouts should not be done to failure until you're throwing up on the side of the track or the road, or until you collapse. But they should cause enough fatigue, enough stress, to which to adapt. You should always walk away from a workout feeling like you're in control of the workout rather than the workout controlling you. It's the coach's job to assess when enough reps have been completed to reap the reward of the workout. Another reason to train without consideration to the number of reps is for the runner to avoid limiting him or herself. If runners focus on 1 rep at a time without any preconceived idea as to how many reps they'll do, they're forced to stay in the moment and focus only on the rep they're running. When they do that, they may end up completing the workout running more reps than what they thought they could. If the coach decides before the workout that runners will do 8 reps, guess what happens when the runners get to rep 7 or 8? They feel tired because their brains think they're close to the end of the workout. Anticipation of an end point affects feelings of fatigue, associative thought processes, and even neuromuscular efficiency. Deciding beforehand or being told by a coach how long the workout is going to be also affects pacing, because optimal pacing strategy is strongly influenced by the duration of exercise. If the coach does not tell the runner how many reps he or she is going to do, the runner will be surprised at what he or she can accomplish. Have your runners reset their limits by not placing limits on their workouts, or on themselves. Concept #6. Only increase the speed of workouts when runners' races have shown that they have achieved a higher level of fitness. Most runners, especially younger ones, want to push the pace all the time. They want to run their workouts faster because they believe that to run faster in races, they need to run faster in workouts. However, this is backwards thinking. Races tell us what our current level of fitness is right now. Races dictate the training paces, not the other way around. To make workouts more difficult, increase the amount of time or number of repetitions that the runner spends at the desired pace or effort rather than having him or her run faster. When running intervals, workouts can also be made more difficult by decreasing the time of the recovery periods. Concept #7. The goal of training is to use the least stressful stimulus to cause the desired adaptation. Runners often perform workouts at speeds that are too fast to obtain the desired result. The problem is that they don't know what the desired result is. To determine the correct speed, you must know the purpose of each workout. For example, say you want to improve someone's V0 max, and she runs 800-meter reps at the speed at V0 max. If running each 800-meter rep in 3:30 elicits V0 max during the work period, which is the goal of the workout, running each rep in 3:20 will certainly also elicit V0 max. But why run each rep in 3:20 when she can run it in 3:30 and still get the same benefit? To improve V0 max, running faster than V0 max pace is not better than running at V0 max pace. All running faster does is add more fatigue to the person's legs without any extra benefit. Running at the correct pace will more specifically target the physiological variable you're trying to train. Concept #8. Runners should always train to their strengths, while improving a runner's weakness will make him or her more successful. Focusing on his or her strengths, physical and psychological, will ultimately lead to the best result. Therefore, the runner's training should always be skewed in favor of what he or she is naturally good at. Concept #9. The aim of training is to introduce training stimuli in such a manner that higher and higher levels of adaptation are achieved following a training stress. The body adapts and physiologically overcompensates so that if the same stress is encountered again, it does not cause the same degree of physiological disruption. In short, the body adapts to be able to handle the stress. Following the adaptation, the runner can do more work. Running presents small threats to our body's survival, and while we're recovering after our runs, our bodies make specific adjustments to assuage the threats. Big change occur as a result of repeated runs and repeated threats, which lead to a concerted accumulation of structural and functional proteins inside of us that make us fitter and look and perform better. For example, repeatedly running at fast speeds that cause acidosis presents a threat to the muscle's survival by creating an environment that inhibits enzyme function, disrupts glycolysis, is muscle force production, and causes fatigue. If we cause acidosis, the muscle says, hey, this person is running so fast that I'm becoming acidic. I won't be able to survive. If this activity is going to be a regular habit, I need to create a better buffer to defend the acidosis and maintain my acid-base balance. So, guess what happens? Runners respond to the repeated acidosis by increasing the size of their muscles' pool of bicarbonate ions, thus increasing their capacity to do more anaerobic work. Concept #10. The human body is great at adapting to stress as long as that stress is applied in small dose. When the stress is too severe or not enough recovery has preceded the new stress, runners can get injured. Therefore, the training must be systematic along with being progressive. The main reason why runners get injured is because they do too much too soon. Therefore, never increase running volume too quickly. Never increase intensity more than about 5% per week. Never increase volume and intensity at the same time, and never introduce too many training variables at the same time. E.g. An increase in running mileage, strength training, and plyometrics. Introduce one training variable, give the runner time to adapt to that new variable, then add another variable, give the runner time to adapt to that new variable, then add another variable. Concept #11. If runners want to improve their performances, their training load must increase. When runners begin a training program, they will experience many signaling responses and subsequent adaptations. However, continual training at the same level decrease is the training. Specific signaling response is involved in the adaptations to training. In other words, if a runner's training stays the same, he or she can expect his or her performance is to stay the same. For example, if a runner runs 10 miles on Sunday morning when he or she is used to running only 8, a strong signal will be sent to make specific adaptations. E.g. an increase in mitochondria, muscle glycogen content, etc. If the runner continues to run 10 miles every Sunday for a period of time, he or she will continue to make adaptations until those adaptations are fully realized. After the runner has run 10 miles so many times that he or she has become habituated to it, a 10-mile run will no longer be enough of a stimulus to initiate any further adaptations. Therefore, if the runner wants to force more adaptations, he or she must run longer than 10 miles or run the miles faster. To become a faster runner, a runner must gradually and systematically increase the amount of stress so that he or she increases the signaling response and subsequent adaptations. Concept #12. It's harder to improve fitness than it is to maintain fitness. Unfortunately, improvements in fitness are achieved somewhat slowly because cellular changes are occurring. However, once a runner has achieved a high level of fitness, Maintaining that fitness level is easier than what it took to achieve that level of fitness in the first place. To maintain fitness, the intensity of training is more important than either the volume I.E, weekly mileage, or the frequency I.E, number of days per week. If runners keep the intensity high, they can maintain their fitness level. Concept #13. Runners lose fitness faster than it's gained. Anyone who has ever been injured and has been forced to take time off from running knows how quickly fitness is lost. There is a lot of truth to the adage, use it or lose it. With the consistent introduction of training stimuli, there is a constant demand to create adaptations. Those adaptations occur to assuage the threats that have been imposed. Once the stimuli are removed, not only is there no longer any demand to create any further adaptations, there is no longer any reason to keep the adaptations that have occurred. So we get rid of them. This is why it's so important to prevent runners from becoming injured, because the runner will not only lose the time off due to the injury, he or she will also have a very long road back to regain the fitness that was lost during the break. Concept #14. A long-term, systematic approach to training will yield the best and most consistent results. Training is not like cooking, simply mixing ingredients together in a skillet and adding a little salt and pepper. It's much more planned and systematic. Nothing is done for the sheer sake of variety. Every week and every month of training should build on what came before it, with each period of training creating a larger aerobic base to lift the runner's level of performance to a higher peak. One of the truths of running success is consistency over the long term, with the running mileage, in executing the training plan, not missing days due to injuries or illness, and even in executing individual workouts. Regarding individual workouts, the runners who are consistent with the pace, running each rep of interval and tempo workouts at the exact prescribed pace and not letting the pace fluctuate, are the ones who succeed the most. They control the effort and the speed rather than letting the effort and the speed control them. Every workout becomes a precise exercise of training the physiology that makes a runner great. Concept #15. Metabolism is tightly regulated by enzymes, and oxygen enzymes function as biological catalysts that speed up chemical reactions. In the absence of enzymes, chemical reactions would not occur quickly enough to generate the energy needed to run. The amount of an enzyme also controls which metabolic pathway is used. For example, having more aerobic enzymes will steer metabolism toward a greater reliance on aerobic metabolism at a given submaximal speed. Enzymes are also activated or inhibited I.E. Their effectiveness in speeding up chemical reactions can be either increased or decreased, determining which metabolic pathways are functional during certain cellular conditions. Thus, enzymes essentially control metabolism and therefore control the pace at which runners will fatigue. The link between an increase in mitochondrial enzyme activity and an increase in mitochondria's capacity to consume oxygen, first made in 1967 in the muscles of rats, has provided much insight into the adaptability of skeletal muscle with training. Research has shown that both aerobic and anaerobic training increase enzyme activity. Metabolism is also regulated by oxygen. The availability of oxygen determines which metabolic pathway predominates. For example, at the end of the metabolic pathway that breaks down carbohydrates, glycolysis, there is a fork in the road. When there is enough oxygen available to meet the muscle's needs, the final product of glycolysis, pyruvate, is converted into an important metabolic intermediate that enters the Krebs cycle for oxidation. This irreversible conversion of pyruvate inside muscles' mitochondria is a decisive reaction in metabolism, since it commits the carbohydrates broken down through glycolysis to be oxidized by the Krebs cycle. However, when there is not enough oxygen available to meet the muscle's needs, pyruvate is converted into lactate. An associated consequence of this latter fate is the accumulation of metabolites and the development of acidosis, causing muscles to fatigue and the runner to slow down. Pyruvate, a metabolic intermediate molecule in several energy pathways. Krebs cycle, a series of chemical reactions inside the mitochondria that use acetyl-CoA to generate ATP and other substrates that contribute to the electron transport chain during aerobic metabolism. Lactate acidosis threshold workouts, running training that increases the running speed at which acidosis occurs, enabling the runner to run at a higher percentage of his or her VO2 for a longer time. VO2 workouts, running training comprised of interval training using work periods lasting 3 to 5 minutes and recovery intervals equal to or slightly less than the time of the work periods. where the runner is operating at their VO2 anaerobic capacity workouts, running interval training that improves the ability to regenerate ATP via anaerobic metabolic pathways, increasing anaerobic fitness and speed. The more aerobically developed runners are, by focusing on increasing their mileage and doing other quality aerobic workouts, the more they'll steer pyruvate toward the Krebs cycle and away from lactate production at a given pace. That's a good thing, because runners get a lot more energy from pyruvate entering the Krebs cycle than what they get from pyruvate being converted into lactate. While pyruvate will always be converted into lactate given a fast enough speed, the goal of training is to increase the speed at which that occurs. Concept #16. Heart rate is a great objective measure of training intensity. There is a positive linear relationship between running intensity and heart rate. As intensity increase is up to VO2 max heart rate increases. Remember that VO2 equals stroke volume times heart rate times the difference in oxygen content between arterial and venous blood. So when heart rate increases, so does VO2. Thus, monitoring and recording heart rate can be useful to understand the stress of workouts. If the runner has a heart rate monitor, make sure they actively use the heart rate to control the pace during workouts to ensure that they train at the optimal intensity, rather than simply passively recording after the workouts are completed what the heart rate was during the workouts. Since a runner's heart rate during easy runs and harder workouts, and thus the intensity is relative to his, or her maximum heart rate, you need to know the runner's max heart rate to prescribe training based on heart rate. During easy runs, heart rate can be used to ensure the intensity remains low so that runners sufficiently recover from the previous day's workout. During interval workouts, heart rate can be used to ensure the intensity is high enough to get the most cardiovascular bang for the buck. Heart rate can also be used to monitor runners' progress over time. For example, as runners' fitness improves, they will be running at a faster pace when at the same heart rate, or to put it another way, their heart rate will be lower when running at the same pace. What heart rate should you record during training? What gives you the most information? For low-intensity aerobic runs, record average heart rate for the entire run. For lactate acidosis threshold workouts, record average heart rate for the entire tempo run portion, excluding warm-up and warm-down, and average heart rate of each rep of interval workouts excluding the recovery intervals between reps and excluding warm-up and warm-down. For VO2 interval workouts, record peak heart rate during each rep. For faster types of workouts, such as anaerobic capacity workouts or sprints, heart rate won't tell you the stress of the workout, and so doesn't need to be recorded. Concept #17. Weight training should never be performed at the expense of run training. If the goal is to become a better runner despite all of the attention given to weight training, it's not necessary for runners unless the runner, 1. has maximized his or her run training by increasing both mileage and intensity, 2. cannot handle the physical stress of running more miles, and or 3. has reached his or her genetic limit for adaptation to the run training. Like other endurance sports, running is primarily limited by the delivery and use of oxygen. There are no studies showing that weight training improves oxygen delivery from lungs to muscles, which is largely dictated by the runner's cardiac output, the amount of red blood cells and hemoglobin in his blood, and his muscles' capillary and mitochondrial volumes. While weight training, especially when performed to increase muscle power production, may be beneficial, most runners are better served by spending more time running and improving the cardiovascular and metabolic parameters associated with endurance than by weight training. For most runners, it's better to increase running volume from 20 to 30 miles per week than to remain at 20 miles per week and include weight training. Most runners have a limited amount of time and energy to devote to training. Most of that available time should be spent performing the activity the runner wants to master. Having said that, supplemental training, including form drills, core strengthening, and dynamic flexibility exercise, may help runners tolerate greater running training loads and prevent injuries. Concept #18. Every runner is an individual. The individuality of training is too often neglected, especially with so many runners running in groups and as part of running clubs. Both research and empirical evidence shows that there is a large interindividual response to training, both in the magnitude of response and in the time frame for developing and retaining training effects. What may work for one runner may not work for another. Not all runners who are capable of the same performance have the same work capacity. Transcription factors, proteins in a cell that bind to a specific part of DNA and control the transfer of genetic information from DNA to RNA. Replication, the process of copying the DNA in a cell, an enzyme-mediated transfer of genetic information from DNA into a strand of mRNA, small cellular organelles involved in polypeptide and protein synthesis, the process of the ribosome reading the mRNA and assembling the appropriate coded amino acids to form a polypeptide or protein. Lactate threshold pace to fetch a pail of water, and Jack runs 7. 30 per mile pace and Jill runs 6. 30 per mile pace, Jack has a more difficult workout because it's going to take him 5 minutes longer to run 5 miles at threshold pace, and Jill will get all the water. Training adaptation like rubbing one stick against another over and over again to cause chemical changes to ignite a fire, running mile after mile for weeks, for months, for years, also causes biochemical changes. Each mile, each foot strike is another rub of one stick against another. If you keep rubbing, positive changes occur. And that's what training adaptation is really all about, to cause changes from the repeated rubbing of one stick against another. How much people adapt to a training stimulus ultimately depends on how responsive their cells are to signals. Muscle cells can detect all kinds of signals, mechanical, metabolic, neural, and hormonal, which are amplified and transmitted via signaling cascades and lead to the events involved in gene expression. This signaling is fast, occurring within minutes of completing a workout. Signaling results in the activation of transcription factors, which are proteins that bind to a specific part of DNA and control the transfer of genetic information from DNA to RNA. Many of the physiological and biochemical adaptations to training begin with a person's DNA, with the copying of one of its double helical strands, a process called replication. The replicated DNA strand, under the action of transcription factors, is then transcribed into a strand of messenger RNA or mRNA in a process called transcription, and the mRNA pairs with a ribosome to generate a protein, a process called translation. Finally, the protein is transported from the nucleus of the cell, where transcription and translation occur to the place where it will function. While a single workout alone, especially if it is new to the person, is a specific signal and activation of transcription factors, repeated workouts lead to a concerted accumulation of mRNA that can be translated into a host of structural and functional proteins. In the case of running, the accumulation of proteins is manifested, for example, as an increase in the number of mitochondria, the microscopic aerobic factories responsible for aerobic metabolism. By contrast, with strength training, the accumulation of proteins is manifested as an increase in the number of contractile proteins in muscles, actin and myosin. Figure 3.2, how the body adapts to exercise, although there are many signaling and adaptation differences, is between high-volume training and high-intensity training. There is also some overlap. For example, both low-intensity high-volume training and high-intensity interval training have been shown to cause mitochondrial biogenesis, the biological synthesis of muscle mitochondria. However, the paths by which mitochondrial biogenesis occurs is different between the two methods of training. High-volume training signals molecular adaptations via an enzyme called calcium, comedulin-dependent protein kinase COMK, which is activated by an increase in intramuscular calcium ions that occurs with repeated muscle contractions. Calcium ions released from their storage site in muscle is the trigger for muscle contraction. Repeated contractions over a long duration means a lot of calcium ions are released, increasing the concentration of intramuscular calcium. High-intensity training signals similar adaptations via an enzyme called adenose, monophosphate-activated protein kinase AMK, which is activated by a decrease in intramuscular ATP that occurs with intense muscle contractions, causing an increase in adenose, monophosphate AMP. When running fast, a lot of ATP is used and broken down into ADP plus AMP, as well as into ADP plus pi. Chapter 3, Concepts of running training. Both signaling pathways have been shown to lead to the transcription of PGC1A, which may be considered a master switch that causes mitochondrial biogenesis, creation or growth, and other adaptations, resulting in an increased capacity to generate ATP aerobically. Thus, training with high volume and high intensity hits these adaptations from both sides. High volume training fat burden. Figure 3.3 Physiological adaptations to high and low intensity training. Generally, the greater the demand placed on the individual, the greater the adaptations. In other words, the more a person runs, the more adaptations he or she will make. However, there is a level of training specific to each person, above which further increase in training volume or intensity do not result in greater fitness. The more fit one gets, the harder it is to improve fitness, despite a lot more training. One of the goals of training, assuming the runner is motivated enough to realize his or her capabilities, is to find out where that point of no return is. As the training load continues to increase, there will come a point when the return on investment is smaller than the risk of injury. In this case, you must decide whether the possible small improvement in performance is worth the injury risk. The main difference between Olympic runners and the rest of us is that Olympic runners continue to make physiological adaptations due to their genetic ability to adapt to more and more training, even when running more than 100 miles per week. Most runners will stop adapting far short of 100 miles per week and would likely get injured if they try to run that much. Does a coach or trainer need to know the molecular basis for how and why specific workouts and types of training lead to higher levels of fitness and faster race times? No and yes. No, because a coach can still get results without knowing how and why. Many coaches are successful without knowing the purpose and the mechanisms of the workouts they prescribe. If a coach advises a runner to increase running volume from 15 miles per week to 30 miles per week, that runner is going to get faster and likely run a PR. There is a direct relationship between how much or how intense a runner runs and how much better he/she gets. Yes, because when a coach understands how and why adaptations occur, he/she can think outside the box and design workouts and training programs to cause specific adaptations. Components of training. There are several aspects of running training that should be considered for an effective and well-rounded training protocol. These components of training address aerobic capacity and interval training, as well as other training styles that challenge the physiological systems. Aerobic capacity training, a runner's training, begins with improving the aerobic capacity. Not only does most of a runner's improvement come from increasing aerobic fitness, but a high aerobic capacity is also beneficial for doing anaerobic work. A runner with a well-trained aerobic system will recover faster from the anaerobic training than one who lacks a high level of aerobic fitness. Mileage. To become a better runner, the number of miles, or more specifically, the amount of time run each week, is the most important component of aerobic capacity training. Running lots of miles stimulates many physiological, biochemical, and molecular adaptations. Think of these adaptations as your body's attempt to cope with the demand placed on it by running often. When someone runs on a regular basis, his or her body must develop mechanisms to meet the demand that's been created. The higher the aerobic capacity, the more solid and complete of a runner the person will be, whether he or she is recreational, elite, or somewhere in between. Aerobic capacity, a measure of the ability of the heart and lungs to get oxygen to the muscles. Interval training, training that varies between high and low-intensity work to challenge the cardiorespiratory system. Chapter 3, Concepts of Running Training. Think of training as a pyramid, with the base of that pyramid the aerobic capacity. The bigger that aerobic capacity, the higher the peak of the pyramid as the base push is the peak up to a greater height. To improve someone's running, the biggest difference in the training from month to month and year to year must be the size of the base. Focusing on the peak of the pyramid by adding more speed work, or by trying to run workouts faster, will never make the person as good of a runner as first focusing on the base. Lactate threshold. I figure 3.4 overall effect of aerobic capacity on peak performance capacity, since the duration of effort is one of the key factors that arouse the biological signal to elicit adaptations that will ultimately lead to improvements in running performance. The amount of time or number of miles spent running is more important than the pace. Therefore, runs should be easy enough to allow an increase in weekly mileage over time. Instead of running the same amount every day, make some days longer than others. For example, if someone runs 30 miles per week, it's better to alternate longer runs with shorter runs rather than run 5 miles per day 6 days per week. Some days provide more stress, some days less. So how much mileage does one need to run to acquire an adequate aerobic base? That's a great question. The answer depends on a number of factors, including the person's genetically determined propensity to continually adapt to aerobic training, the amount of time they have to run, the specific event for which they are training, and their running goals. Obviously, the longer the race, the more mileage needed to run. Interestingly, however, there isn't a proportional relationship between weekly mileage and racing distance. In other words, training for a half marathon doesn't mean running half as much as when training for a marathon. Even though the marathon is twice as long as a half marathon and more than 4 times as long as a 10K, marathon runners don't run double the weekly mileage as half marathon runners and don't run 4 times as much as 10K runners. Even for shorter races, people need to run a lot. The best 5K runners in the world run almost as much as the best marathon runners. The reason fourth is that any race that takes longer than 3 minutes to run is primarily influenced by the aerobic system. The shorter the race, the more critical anaerobic training becomes, but for all distance running races, aerobic metabolism is king. The best way to determine how much aerobic training is needed is to slowly and systematically increase the mileage from month to month and year to year, taking care to note how the person responds to the training. When already running a lot, don't increase the mileage unless prior training and racing experience gives you reason to believe that the client will continue to improve with more mileage. If his or her performance hasn't reached a plateau at 30 miles per week, there's no reason yet to increase the mileage to 40. Despite what many runners believe, more is not always better. More is only better if the runner continues to adapt to more. If the person hasn't been running for very long, aerobic base building may be the only type of training he or she does for a while. Be careful when increasing mileage to allow time for adaptation and to avoid injury. Over time, the weekly mileage progression can look like this. Weeks 1, 4, 15, 15, 15, 10 miles per week, weeks 5, 8, 20, 20, 20, 13 miles per week, weeks 9, 12, 25, 25, 25, 16 miles per week. Running more is not just better for a runner's performance. In addition to the many physiological benefits of running, it's a very effective way to lose weight, since running burns more calories than just about any other physical activity. Data from the National Runners and Walkers Health Studies, the largest series of research studies on the relationships between running and health, found that women who averaged more than 40 miles of running per week compared with those who ran less than 10 miles per week had a 10% lower body mass index, an indicator of body weight for height, and the most popular measurement to determine obesity. They also had 8% lower waist circumferences, 7% lower hip circumferences, 4% lower chest circumferences, and 18% smaller bra cups, which, as previously discussed, is an advantage for female distance runners because it reduces the amount of excess fat. In every age group studied, from 18 to 24 years to over 50 years, the more miles the women ran, the lower their body mass index and chest, waist, and hip circumferences. Many other studies have also shown that how much a person weighs is directly linked to the amount of aerobic exercise he or she does. Variation and training variation is an important concept in training. It's important to manipulate training parameters, such as intensity and volume during the training process. Variation of long runs. In simple terms, long runs improve endurance by running for a longer amount of time than what the person is used to. Because the runner's legs have little concept of distance, only of intensity and time, the amount of time the runner spends on his or her feet is actually more important than the number of miles covered. But runners are creatures of habit and are obsessed with numbers, so they usually think in terms of miles. To prevent shocking the legs once a week and to decrease the risk of injury, the long run shouldn't make up more than about a third of the weekly mileage. For example, if someone runs 20 miles per week, his or her long run shouldn't be longer than 7 miles. When a runner plans to run longer than 20 miles to prepare for a marathon, ideally, he should run at least 60 miles per week. But most runners, unless they're advanced, are probably not going to run that much. For beginner or intermediate runners, keeping the long run to no more than a third of the weekly mileage may not be possible if they run low mileage, and they run only a few times per week. If the long run is 18 to 22 miles and the peak weekly mileage is 35, they need to be very careful about how they plan the rest of their training so they don't shock their legs each week, running a distance that's much longer than anything else they've run during the week. In this case, they should try running one medium distance run during the week that's at least half to 2/3 the distance of their long run. When someone runs for a long time, a lot of interesting adaptations to occur, including mitochondrial biogenesis. Even one long run cause is a cascade of molecular events mediated by DNA transcription factors and messenger RNA to create new mitochondria to enhance aerobic capacity, fat burning, and aerobic power. Muscle capillarization, the sustained increase in blood flow through the muscle capillaries, prompts an expansion of the capillary network. Greater fuel storage, running long enough cause, is depletion or a severe lowering of muscle glycogen, the stored form of carbohydrate. Since carbohydrate is the muscle's preferred source of fuel, getting low on glycogen is bad for muscle function. However, muscles respond rather elegantly to situations that threaten or deplete their supply of fuel. They synthesize and store more glycogen than was previously present, which increases endurance. It's like emptying a full glass and getting a refilled larger glass in its place. Greater reliance on fat. When muscles run out of carbohydrate, they're forced to rely on fat and so become more effective at using fat for energy. Increased capacity to make more glucose. The runner's liver, sensing the low fuel tank, takes things that are not carbohydrate, namely amino acids and lactate, and converts them into carbohydrate in the form of glucose to provide more quick fuel to ISSA, running technique, and programming I8, I9 sustain the pace. That's called gluconeogenesis, is literally the formation of new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. This process is a very cool aspect of metabolism. Imagine if your car did that when it starts to run out of fuel. Imagine if one part of your car, say, the battery, senses when the car's fuel tank gets low and takes another part of your car, say, the back seat, and converts it into gasoline so you can keep driving on the highway. This process keeps blood glucose levels from dropping too low. Thanks, liver. Stronger muscles, bones, tendons, and ligaments. Running for long periods is tough on the muscles and joints, so they adapt by becoming stronger to handle the stress of pounding the pavement. Greater psychological strength. When someone runs for a long time, his or her legs aren't the only body parts that get tired. The mind does too. This psychological aspect of long runs may be just as important as the physiological reasons for doing them. If the farthest someone has ever run is 5 miles, running 10 miles, much less a marathon, may seem overwhelming. But when a little stress is added at a time, the runner prepares himself to handle longer and longer runs. This is especially important for beginner runners who don't have experience with running long. It gives them the confidence to complete a half, marathon or marathon. Long runs can also be used to train fast, which muscle fibers without running anaerobically. Traditionally thought of as the muscle fibers for sprinting, fast, twitch fibers are also recruited when the slow, which fibers fatigue. When someone runs long enough, the slow, which fibers begin to fatigue, causing some fast, twitch fibers to be recruited to pick up the slack so the pace can be maintained. It is often asked if it's okay to break the long run up into 2 runs on the same day, either because of lack of time or to reduce fatigue. The short answer is no, it's ineffective. The specific endurance and metabolic aspects of long runs can only be obtained by continuous running. If the long run is broken up, the glycogen fuel tank won't be depleted, thus missing the opportunity to make all the great physiological and psychological adaptations. When training for a marathon, unless the runner plans on stopping for a frappuccino break and read the newspaper at a coffee shop for a few hours in the middle of the marathon before hopping back on the course to complete the rest of the race, breaking up the long run isn't going to help him or her come race day. Runners should try to do long runs in the morning, just like the races themselves. When training for a marathon, use the long run as a marathon dress rehearsal. The runner should wear the long run pace. The pace of the long run depends on the runner's level of experience. For a beginner or even intermediate runner, the pace of isn't as important as the time spent running. If there's any time when slower is better, the long run is it. Run at a comfortable conversational pace. Breathing, though elevated, should be very comfortable and rhythmic, and the runner should be able to hold a conversation the entire time, although toward the end of the long run, when it gets very difficult, the runner may not want to talk to anyone at all. For an advanced runner who wants to improve his or her half, marathon or marathon time, perhaps even qualify for the Boston Marathon, some faster, paced running can be included in the long run. Try running a portion of the long run at marathon pace or acidosis threshold pace. Long run nutrition when training for a long race like a marathon. Long runs are the best chance to practice the pre-marathon meal. As the runs get very long, runners should practice getting up and eating breakfast before they run, just as they'll do on marathon race day. They should try different foods to see what works and what their stomachs can handle. As a guideline, runners should consume about 200 to 300 calories 1.5 to 2 hours before they run. The pre-run meal should include carbohydrate and protein, like a bagel or toast with peanut butter. If someone runs soon after getting out of bed and doesn't have 2 hours before he or she runs, consume 100 to 200 calories, like a nutrition bar, a banana, and a sports drink. Stay away from fat and fiber. Fat takes longer to digest. So the carbohydrate and protein in the meal take longer to be absorbed into the blood. Fiber increase is the urge to go to the bathroom, which can make long runs very uncomfortable if there's no place to stop. Once out the door running, what a runner eats gets a little trickier. With the popularity of marathon running has also come the popularity of carbohydrate drinks, gels, and bars to replenish blood glucose while running. It seems that everyone now does Saturday or Sunday long runs with a fuel belt around his waist. But do runners really need to fuel during long runs? Chapter 3, Concepts of Running Training. Ingesting carbohydrate during long runs maintains blood glucose level and makes the run feel better. However, doing so has the potential to defeat one of the main purposes of the long run, which is to deplete muscles of carbohydrate. Ingesting carbohydrate during long runs provides muscles with an accessible fuel, thereby blunting the 3 adaptations a runner is trying to achieve. 1. The depletion and subsequent resynthesis of more glycogen. 2. The muscle's reliance on fat. And 3. The liver's ability to make new glucose via gluconeogenesis. If carbs are consumed during long runs, the liver doesn't have to make new glucose. It can go on vacation, sitting back and watching as glucose enters the blood from what is ingested. Not consuming carbs during long runs, though effective for forcing adaptations, isn't for beginner runners or the faint of heart. Running until the fuel tank is depleted doesn't feel good. Beginner runners just need to get through the long runs, which already provide enough of a stress. For beginner runners whose goal is to finish the marathon without any concern for the time it takes, they can feel free to consume carbs during their long runs so they can get through the runs. The carbs can give them both a physical and psychological boost. When ingesting carbs, ingest simple carbs, preferably glucose, so the sugar can quickly pass through the stomach and get into the small intestine, from where it's absorbed into the blood. Gels, gummy bears, jelly beans, and sports drinks are all good, easily digestible sources of simple carbs. For intermediate or advanced runners who have run a few marathons before and whose goal is to run their next marathon faster, they can try to go without carbs on some of their long runs so they maximize their physiological adaptations. However, they should be prepared for the sluggish feeling they're likely to experience toward the end of the run. Although not fueling long training runs can help marathon performance, the marathon itself is another story. In the marathon, runners definitely want to consume carbs because maintaining blood glucose level for as long as possible is important to maintain the pace. Consuming carbs in the marathon, when never doing so during long runs, can cause gastrointestinal distress in the race that may require some trips to the pore. A pot is along the race course. To avoid this problem yet still attend to the physiological purpose of the long runs, runners can alternate long runs during which they consume and don't consume carbohydrate. Acidosis lactate threshold. Training the acidosis lactate threshold at increase is the running speed at which acidosis occurs, enabling the runner to run at a higher percentage of his or her V0 max for the longer the race for which someone is training. The more important it is to train the AT because the more important it becomes to hold a specific aerobic pace for an extended period. So for the half, marathon, and marathon, the AT should be the focus of the training. The keys to success for longer races, which have become so popular, are getting the AT pace as fast as you can and being able to run as close to AT pace as possible for as long as possible. As the runner progresses with AT workouts, increase the training load by increasing how much they run at pace in a single workout or by adding a second AT workout each week. Although runners are often tempted to try to beat their time from last week in the same workout, the way a runner improves his or her max aerobic pace is by progressively increasing the amount of training done at pace, not by trying to force the pace to get faster by running faster workouts. Think of the acidosis threshold as the ceiling of state aerobic running. The more a runner keeps running at the ceiling, the more likely he or she is to make physiological adaptations that raise that ceiling. Increase the pace of the workouts only when races are run faster than usual, which shows that fitness level is higher. Heart rate is lower than it usually is when running at pace, which indicates that fitness is improving, and or at pace begins to feel much easier than it used to. At running is hard but controlled aerobic running. The length of the workouts, rather than the pace, is what causes fatigue and sets the stage for adaptation. so runners shouldn't push the pace. They should run at their corrected pace and work on holding that pace for longer periods of time. At pace is a lot faster than normal easy running pace and a bit faster than marathon pace. It should feel comfortably hard. I've noticed that runs are the most difficult type of workout for most runners to run at the correct pace, especially those who are young or inexperienced with these workouts, because they require holding back and not pushing the pace. That comfortably hard feeling requires practice to attain and hold. At pace for beginner and recreational/intermediate runners, about 10 to 15 seconds per mile, slower than 5K race pace, equal or very close to 10K race pace 80 to 8, a 5% of max heart rate at pace for competitive and highly trained runners, about 15 to 20 seconds per mile slower than 10K race pace 8, a 5 to 90% of max heart rate table, 3.1 at workout pace, is table 3.1 at workout pace, is cont table 3.1 at workout pace, is cont interval training alternates high-intensity work periods with low-intensity recovery periods. It's an effective way to improve fitness quickly. Everyone's doing it, from athletes to grandmas. Unfortunately, few runners and grandmas get it right. Interval training has an interesting history. While many runners used interval training in the first half of the 20th century, it was distance runner Emil Zatopek of Czechoslovakia, winner of the 10,000 meters at the 1,948 Olympics and the 5,000 meters, 10,000 meters, and marathon at the 1,952 Olympics, who made it popular. He was so successful that every runner wanted to know what the heck he was doing. Meanwhile, back in the laboratory, it wasn't until the 1960 that famous Swedish physiologist Per-Olof Astrand discovered, using a stationary bicycle, that by breaking up a set amount of work into smaller segments, we can perform a greater volume of work at a higher intensity. For example, we can run 5x 1,000 meters with breaks faster than we can run 5,000 meters continuously. We can run 10x 500 meters with breaks faster than we can run 5x 1,000 meters. And we can run 20x 250 meters with breaks faster than we can run 10x 500 meters. The shorter the distance run, the faster we can run the total distance of the workout. May sound obvious, but this simple observation is the basis for interval training and for improving fitness quickly. Astrand also found that, when the work periods were 3 minutes long, there was great physiological strain in his subjects, exemplified by very high heart rates and blood lactate values. However, when the work and rest periods were shortened, the physiological strain was dramatically reduced, even though the total oxygen consumption during the workout was not markedly reduced. Specifically, if the work periods are less than 2 minutes long, the physiological strain is markedly reduced despite the same total workout time and same intensity. This is an important discovery because it tells us that, if you design an interval workout with the work periods shorter than 2 minutes, you can accomplish the same or even more work at the desired intensity with less stress. Conversely, if the goal of the interval workout is to overload the cardiovascular system, design the workout with work periods longer than 2 minutes. Subsequent experiments by Astrand showed that if you keep shortening the work and rest periods, it's possible to perform at even higher intensities without accumulating lactate or severely stressing the cardiovascular system, see section below on anaerobic power intervals. Preceding Astrand's work by 30 years was the attention given to interval training by German coach Waldemar Gerschler and physiologist Hans Riendell of Germany's Freiburg University. When they studied interval training in the 1930s, they focused on its cardiovascular aspects and believed that the stimulus for cardiovascular improvement occurs during the recovery intervals between work periods rather than during the periods of activity, as the heart rate decreases from an elevated value. Thus, the emphasis of the workout was placed on the recovery interval, prompting Gerschler and Riendell to call it an interval workout or interval training. Gerschler and Riendell's original interval training method consisted of running periods ranging from 30 to 70 seconds at an intensity that elevated the heart rate to 170 to 180 beats per minute, followed by sufficient recovery to allow the heart rate to decrease to 120 beats per minute, signifying the readiness to perform the next work period. During the recovery interval, the heart rate declines quickly since the runner has stopped running fast, but there is a lot of blood returning to the heart. Since the heart rate declines rapidly, there's a greater filling time in the left ventricle to accommodate the return of the large volume of blood to the heart, resulting in a brief increase in stroke volume. The increase in stroke volume place is an overload on the heart, which makes the heart stronger, and enables the skeletal muscles to be cleared of waste products quickly due to the elevated rate of blood flow when there is little demand for activity from the tissues. Chapter 3, Concepts of running training since stroke volume peaks during the recovery interval, and because there are multiple recovery intervals during an interval workout, stroke volume peaks many times, providing a stimulus for improving maximum stroke volume, and thus the capacity of the oxygen transport system. Apart from the large performance benefit of interval training, it also has many health-related benefits. It improves vascular health, decrease, is cardiovascular disease risk factors, increase, is physical and cardiac performance following coronary bypass surgery, and reverses the risk factors of metabolic syndrome. It also has the huge potential to help someone lose fat, as it has a huge effect on metabolism and calorie burning. Its intense nature disrupts the body's homeostasis, making interval training more effective than continuous running for increasing metabolic rate following a workout, as homeostasis is reestablished. The more intense the workout, the greater and longer the post-workout elevation in metabolism because recovery is an aerobic process. Scientific studies on interval training have shown it to increase proteins that transport fatty acids across the mitochondrial membrane, increase skeletal muscle enzyme activity, and muscle oxidative capacity of carbohydrates and fat to the same extent as or more than traditional continuous aerobic training, and turn on the signaling cascade that leads to the synthesis of fat-burning mitochondria, which has been traditionally thought to occur only in response to aerobic endurance training. Interval training induces some of the same peripheral muscular adaptations as continuous aerobic training, such as increased mitochondria and aerobic enzyme activity. Possibly the greatest use of interval training lies in its ability to target individual metabolic energy systems and physiological variables, improving specific aspects of a person's fitness. The physiological responses of interval workouts differ tremendously depending on how the workouts are structured, specifically on the duration of each rep. 4 variables can be manipulated within an interval workout: intensity, pace, speed, each work period duration time, distance of each work period, number of reps, time of each recovery period. With so many possible combinations of these 4 variables, the potential to vary workouts is nearly unlimited. The pace, the time you hold the pace, the number of reps, and the time and type of recovery between reps should all be considered. Remember the purpose of interval training and let that be your guide when designing workouts. For example, it makes little sense to run something like 10x half, mile at half, marathon pace, or 20x 200 meters at 5K pace, since the total distance of those workouts is less than what you could run continuously. For example, 20x 200 meters is 4,000 meters, so if you run 200s at 5K pace, that's not a stressful workout because you could run that pace continuously for 5K. The optimal way to do that workout would be to either run faster than 5K race pace or run enough reps that the total distance equals more than 5,000 meters. Aerobic power intervals, one of the best methods to improve V0 max and the capacity of the cardiovascular system, the heart's ability to pump blood and oxygen to the active muscles, is interval training using work periods lasting 3 to 5 minutes and recovery intervals equal to or slightly less than the time of the work periods. The cardiovascular adaptations associated with interval training, including hypertrophy of the left ventricle and a greater stroke volume and cardiac output, increase a runner's V0 max, raising the aerobic ceiling. Cardiac performance is a primary determinant of V0 max. Since V0 max is achieved when maximum stroke volume and heart rate are reached, the work period should be performed at an intensity that elicits maximum heart rate during each work period. This type of interval workout, which is demanding, is one of the best workouts a person can do to improve cardiovascular conditioning. In comparison to lactate threshold training, which is mostly about what's happening in the runner's legs, the site of adaptation of V0 max training moves from the skeletal muscles to the cardiovascular system. Thus, the most powerful stimulus for change in cardiac function is different from the most powerful stimulus for change in skeletal muscle, aerobic capacity, lactate threshold. In the following figure, the increase in oxygen consumption VO and heart rate HR during an interval workout. The goal is to reach and sustain V0 max during each work period. In this example, V0 max is reached briefly during the second work period and is reached sooner during the third work period due to the elevated V0 at the beginning of the third work period. VO2 max pace V0 max pace is a lot faster than acidosis threshold at pace. The pace should feel hard but manageable. V0 max pace for recreational runners. Between mile and 2-mile race pace about 20 to 25 seconds per mile faster than 5K race pace 95 to 100% of max heart rate V0 max pace for competitive and highly trained runners. Equal or very close to 2-mile race pace about 10 to 15 seconds per mile faster than 5K race pace about 25 to 30 seconds per mile faster than 10K race pace 95 to 100% of max heart rate. To determine max heart rate, run 1 mile, 4 laps of a standard outdoor track, while wearing a heart rate monitor, starting at a comfortable pace and picking it up each lap until running all out over the final lap. Check the heart rate monitor a few times over the final lap. The highest number observed is the max heart rate. Below is a table of V0 max training paces based on a runner's 5K and 10K times. Simply find 5K or 10K race time from the table and find the corresponding V0 max pace. In the absence of a recent 5K or 10K race for reference, use a combination of effort hard, but not all out, and heart rate to run the right pace. Table 3.2 V02 max workout pace. Is Table 3.2 V02 max workout pace? Is Cont Table 3.2 V0 max workout pace? Is Cont when doing V0 max intervals? Remember that it's better to run at the correct V0 max pace and add more reps rather than run faster. Increase the pace of the workouts only when races have shown that fitness level is higher. Heart rate is lower than it usually is when running at V0 max pace, which indicates that fitness is improving, and slash or V0 max pace begins to feel much easier than it used to. Make the work periods at least 3 minutes because running for shorter than that doesn't give enough time for heart rate and V0 to reach their maximum. Cap the work periods at 5 minutes because running for longer than that prevents the runner from repeating the work period more than a couple of times in one workout unless the pace is slowed. During the recovery intervals of each workout, the runner should keep jogging to keep V0 elevated. This helps the runner to reach V0 max earlier in each work period so that more time is spent running at V0 max pace. If the runner is too fatigued to jog, at least walk fast. V0 max interval workouts can be made more challenging by changing the components of the workouts. In order of difficulty from hardest to easiest, here's how to make interval workouts harder. Increase the length of each work period. The most significant way to make an interval workout harder is to increase the amount of time spent running at V0 max pace because the body sense is how hard and how long it's working. Increase the number of repetitions. Adding more reps is the total time spent running at V0 max pace. Decrease the duration of the recovery intervals. Shortening how much recovery taken between hard efforts is the runner to be more fatigued at the start of each work period. As the runner progresses with interval workouts, the training load can be increased by increasing how much work is done at V0 max pace in a single workout, or by adding a second interval workout each week. Although runners are often tempted to try to beat their time from last week in the same workout, aerobic power improves by progressively increasing the amount of training done at V0 max pace, not by trying to force the pace to get faster by running faster workouts. In research published in European Journal of Applied Physiology, it was found that decreasing the power output on the bike enabled individuals to sustain V0 max for longer compared to keeping the power constant throughout the workout. In other words, once individuals reached their V0 max, they were able to sustain it for an average of only 2.3 minutes before having to stop. But when the power was decreased, they were able to sustain V0 max for an average of 16 minutes. It was also found that, while both V0 max and the ability to sustain V0 max were correlated to the heart stroke volume, V0 max and the ability to sustain V0 max were not correlated to each other, suggesting that the ability to sustain exercise at V0 max has different limiting factors than those related to V0 max itself. Other research has shown that V0 max has a large genetic component, but the ability to sustain V0 max can be trained. What does all this mean? When prescribing V0 max intervals, try slowing the pace as the runner begins to fatigue so he/she can spend more total time at V0 max in the workout. For example, if running 800-meter half-mile reps in 3:15 when the runner starts to fatigue and has trouble holding the pace, decrease the time to 3:20 to 3:23, then 3:30, and so on until the runner is cooked. Alternatively, and perhaps the better way, reduce the distance of the reps as the runner begins to fatigue so that the pace can be maintained. For example, if running 800 meter half-mile reps at V0 max pace, cut the distance down as the runner starts to show signs of fatigue and has trouble holding the pace. 600 meter reps, then 400 meter reps, then 200 meter reps until the runner is cooked so they can squeeze out as much total work at V0 max pace as possible. Speed work, anaerobic capacity intervals. Anaerobic capacity refers to the ability to regenerate energy ATP through glycolysis. When the running pace exceeds the rate at which the heart and blood flow can provide oxygen to the muscles, some of the energy for muscle contraction is provided anaerobically. Anaerobic interval training improves the ability to regenerate ATP via anaerobic metabolic pathways, increasing anaerobic fitness and speed. Think of anaerobic capacity interval training as speed endurance. Given the many fatigue-inducing factors associated with anaerobic oxygen, independent metabolism, it's important to develop the anaerobic capacity once the runner has become as aerobically developed as possible. Work periods lasting 30 seconds to 2 minutes target improvements in anaerobic capacity by using anaerobic glycolysis as the predominant energy system. These short, intense work periods with recovery intervals 2 to 4 times as long as the work periods increase the activity of the enzymes involved in glycolysis, so that glycolysis can regenerate ATP more quickly for muscle contraction. Anaerobic capacity intervals also improve the ability to buffer the muscle acidosis that occurs when there is a large dependence on anaerobic metabolism, and they increase running speed by recruiting fast, twitch muscle fibers. With anaerobic interval training, runners should leave their heart rate monitors at home, since heart rate does not adequately reflect the workout intensity. Anaerobic training is not about heart rate and oxygen delivery. It's about what's going on inside the skeletal muscles. Anaerobic power intervals. Anaerobic power refers to the ability to regenerate ATP via the phosphagen system. Anaerobic power training is true speed work. The development of speed requires running at maximum speed sprinting. Although the phosphagen system plays a minor role in a distance runner's performance, it becomes more important the shorter the race. However, even distance runners benefit from training anaerobic power and improving speed. For many reasons, it's valuable for runners to train with a wide range of speeds, from very slow to very fast, including the recruitment and training of different muscle fibers, the optimization of running technique, and the development of muscle force and power. Anaerobic power intervals give the runner a chance to run very fast, recruit fast, twitch muscle fibers, and develop speed and power. Work periods lasting 5 to 15 seconds target improvements in anaerobic power by using the phosphagen system as the predominant energy system. These very short, very fast sprints with 3 to 5 minute recovery intervals that allow for complete replenishment of creatine phosphate in the muscles increase fast, twitch motor unit activation and the activity of creatine kinase, the enzyme responsible for breaking down creatine phosphate. Other types of training hills, the feel of one's heart pounding in their chest and their shortness of breath at the top of a hill, attest to what hills provide the cardiorespiratory system, but they also provide a great workout for skeletal muscles. Hill training increase is leg muscle power, can be used as a transition into more formal speed work, improves the performance of the heart since heart rate can easily climb up to its maximum when running up a hill, and uses the muscles of the legs, arms, and trunk in ways that are different from running over flat terrain. Since hill running uncouples the effort from the speed I.E, the speed ISSA running technique and programming I-105 is relatively slow even though it's hard work. The exact pace is not as important as the effort. When running hills, the runner should aim for a specific effort rather than a specific speed. Even though running uphill seems harder because the heart must do more work to send blood and oxygen to the muscle mass that is working against gravity, downhill running is the biggest problems. If someone has ever run a race with long or steep downhills, he knows what running downhill can do to his legs. The reason downhills are so tough is because of all the gravity-induced eccentric muscle contractions, during which the muscle fibers are forced to lengthen, causing them to tear. Eccentric contractions are also unique in that fewer muscle fibers are active compared to concentric or isometric muscle contractions, causing the force generated to be distributed over a smaller area of muscle. A greater force over a smaller area equals greater tension, which causes even more damage. The forces of impact and braking are also greater during downhill running compared to uphill and flat running. Therefore, running downhill carries a greater risk of overuse injury compared to uphill or flat running. The muscle damage decrease is the muscle's ability to produce force, which slows the pace on the flat and uphill portions of the race and leads to delay, onset muscle soreness, which includes an inflammatory response and lasts for a few days following the race as the muscle fibers heal. The good news is that damaging muscle fibers with eccentric contractions makes them heal back stronger, protecting them from future damage. While a runner can expect their muscles to be sore after the first time running downhill, subsequent downhill workouts will cause less soreness since running downhill has a prophylactic effect on muscle damage and soreness. Fartlek, from the Swedish words fart, meaning speed, and lek, meaning play, dates to 1937 when it was developed by Swedish coach Gösta Homer, who used it as part of Sweden's military training. Fartleks are continuous runs during which the runner literally plays with speed, picking up the pace at different times when they reach specific landmarks or just based on how one feels. Distances, speeds, and recovery periods vary within the same workout. Fartleks can be structured or unstructured. Periodization, the scientific rationale for periodization, is rooted in the general adaptation syndrome GAS, developed by Hungarian endocrinologist Dr. Hans Selye, and is based on the premise that organisms need to receive an optimal training stimulus that is balanced with appropriate recovery to cause adaptation and favorable long-term training effects. The general adaptation syndrome is characterized by 3 phases. Alarm, during which the organism recognizes the threat and begins to react to it. Resistance, during which the organism tries to cope with the threat, and recovery or exhaustion, during which the organism has either eliminated or successfully overcome the effect of the stressor, or failed to overcome the threat, depleting the organism's physiological resources. Exhaustion, in contrast to recovery, occurs with chronic exposure to a particular stressor that results in lost adaptation. Periodization is thus a blueprint of predetermined sequential periods of focused training that guides the coach and runner in the acquisition of specific characteristics of fitness. It is not a static blueprint, but rather a dynamic one that the coach and runner use to formulate an optimal training program. General adaptation syndrome GAS, the 3 stages of adaptation the body goes through in response to stress, alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. Training involves the repetition of exercise, is designed to make the execution of motor skills automatic and develop the structural and metabolic functions that increase physical performance. The process necessitates a long-term approach and plan, in part because it's difficult to assess in real time the effects of a workout or a training period. That feedback is delayed, as it takes at least a couple of months for the effects of your runs to be realized and measurably revealed in greater physical abilities and working capacity. In other words, running 10x 400 meters in 80 seconds today won't make you faster this weekend. You'll need to wait a couple of months to see a difference in your fitness level and race times. The theoretical and historical frameworks of periodization are not always in line with biological truths, and we are therefore left with several assumptions. For starters, periodization assumes that there are established time frames for the development and retention of specific fitness adaptations, and that biological adaptation to a given training plan follows a predictable course. However, as most runners and any coach who has been coaching for a while knows, not every runner adapts or progresses at the same rate or to the same extent. Indeed, individual runners often respond differently to one another, even with identical workouts and training programs. Research has also shown a lot of variability in the response to both cardiovascular and strength training. That leads us to the second assumption, that training plans, training phase duration, and rates of progression can be generalized among the population, or that the training of elite runners, who are, by definition, extreme outliers, can be generalized and extrapolated to other elite runners or to less talented runners. Although the training of elite runners is often celebrated and admired, we actually don't learn much from studying how elite athletes train, because their results are more a product of their extreme talent, both their latent talent and their talented responsiveness to training than of their specific training. It's not helpful to copy the training of elite runners unless you have the same parents. A third assumption of periodization is that various fitness attributes are best developed in a sequential way E.G., strength before power or endurance before speed, and fourth is the assumption that training can be adequately forecast, that we can predict what's going to happen later so that we can plan for it now. One of the reasons these assumptions exist is that periodization is a difficult thing to study scientifically, mostly because it's difficult to use the scientific method to test whether or not one method of training is better than another method of training. Scientists like to and need to control independent variables to isolate the dependent variable that they're trying to study. Variables that get in the way are called confounding variables for a reason. They confound the results. If two people train differently, person A or group A trains in a periodized way, and person B or group B trains in an unperiodized way, or they train in different periodized ways, and 6 months later, person A or group A runs a 5K or half marathon faster than person B or group B, can we say that the better race performance was because of the periodized training? Can we conclude that periodized training is better than non-periodized training? What if we tried a repeated measure study design in which a periodized training plan and a non-periodized training plan, or two different kinds of periodized plans, are both given to one group of 20 runners in random order, with 10 runners given plan A first and 10 others given plan B first, which, statistically speaking, is a more powerful study design than an independent group's design? Can we then determine which training plan is better? How do we account for the cumulative effect of training and the effect of initial training on later training and on race results? How do we know that a runner's race performance is the result of his or her training in the 6 months leading up to that race, rather than the result of the previous 6 months of training? These are difficult questions for science to definitively answer. There are so many variables that influence athletic performance in general, and distance running performance in particular, that it becomes a nightmare to control all of them to isolate the effect of the specific training program. Perhaps this is why most of the scientific research on periodization has been on maximal strength measured as 1 rep max, because maximal strength is easier to measure and is a more stable parameter, and therefore less sensitive to confounding variables compared to distance running performance. But even those strength training studies have not tested periodization, only variation of the volume and intensity. Those studies have found that volume and intensity variations cause greater increases in maximal strength compared to training that does not vary the volume and intensity. Doctrine that periodization has many critics, including Verkhoshansky himself, who argued that the training plan should be organized based on the athlete's actual adaptation potential, rather than on preset time frames of the theoretical periodization model. As attractive as Selye's general adaptation, syndrome and adaptation energy may be to guide the coach and runner in training, no scientific studies have been performed to specifically test the hypothesis that the general adaptation syndrome is valid in humans like in Selye's rodents, or that it can be used as the basis for training periodization. Variation and training variation is an important concept in training. It's important to manipulate training parameters, such as intensity and volume during the training process. Variation of training, which is the cornerstone of periodization, alters the expression of genes that results in greater adaptation. However, if you vary the training too much, that your adaptive energy is too widely distributed across many targets, your ability to adapt diminishes and you can stunt your progress. Conversely, focusing on a single aspect of fitness at a time with repeated training stressors can induce rapid improvement in that single target, but if you prolong such a concentrated focus, that can result in unremitting monotony, staleness, and overhabituation. Doing the same training repeatedly can blunt expression of key molecules involved in endurance adaptations, which can result in stagnation. Therefore, variation in training must be carefully controlled, enough to avoid monotony and overhabituation, but not too much to avoid inadequate adaptation. Don't confuse variation with periodization. Just because a training program varies the training stimulus doesn't make it periodized. While variation is a critical aspect of optimal training, periodization is more than the simple variation of training stimuli. For one thing, the variation of periodized programs shouldn't be arbitrary or random. It should be systematic and planned. Periodization is about how and when training stimuli are varied, and how and when the volume and intensity of training are manipulated throughout the year, always considering the runner's progress and modifying the training accordingly. As the word indicates, periodization is about how the periods of training are designed and varied to improve athletic performance. Variation is but one feature of that overall process. Training cycles periodization divides a year of training into major periods called macrocycles, which are about 3 to 4 months and most often comprise a single competitive season E.G., a cross-country season or track and field season for a high school or college runner. In endurance sports like distance running, macrocycles are typically pieced together to create an annual cycle, which can be shorter than 1 year for less experienced/recreational runners, while shorter periods than a year are used for strength/speed/power sports. The training of elite athletes can also be done in larger macrocycles, like 4-year Olympic cycles. Figure 3.6 training cycles. Figure 3. 7 runnings, specific training cycle, 3 to 4 months within the macrocycle. One phase of 3 to 4 weeks is reserved for important races. While this is the typical periodization model and may be the optimal way to prepare and peak for races within a given season E.G., cross-country or track and field for a athlete, it is in stark contrast to what most runners do. One drawback of the traditional periodization model and of biology is its inability to enable runners to run their best races all the time. While specific races throughout the year may be included in training to meet specific training objectives E.G., pacing preparatory phase, the phase in a training macrocycle that focus, is training on the development of basic athletic abilities like cardiorespiratory endurance, speed, strength, and flexibility. General preparatory phases, specific preparatory phases, targets training phase is within a preparatory training phase where certain attributes like anaerobic or aerobic thresholds are trained in preparation for a running race. Competitive phase, the training phase focused on developing the specific competitive sports skills while maintaining the general physical performance achieved from the preparatory phase. A 2 to 4 week period that serves as a recovery period between training macrocycles. Practice, benchmarks, race strategy/skill practice. Too much racing throughout the year is not the best way to be the best runner one can be, especially if it comes at the expense of general and specific preparation. Since you can fit 3 to 4 macrocycles within a calendar year, that leaves the potential for 3 to 4 competition phase is of 3 to 4 weeks each, for a total of 9 to 16 weeks of great racing. For runners who train for one target race, like a marathon, rather than plan the training for multiple seasons of racing with multiple races at the end of each season, it's better to either lengthen the duration of the 3 to 4 month macrocycle with longer general and specific preparation phases and a short 1-week competition phase, or piece 2 or 3 macrocycles together with shortened 1-week competition phases for benchmark races leading up to the target race and eliminating the recovery/transition phase until after the target race. Figure 3.9 runnings, specific training cycle, 2 consecutive macrocycles. Macrocycles are divided into medium-sized mesocycles, which typically last 3 to 6 weeks. Each mesocycle has a theme with 1 or 2 training objectives or targets. The mesocycle is the scene of the training program. Like the director of a movie, the coach decides on the theme of the scene to meet the overall fitness objectives. As fitness improves, each successive mesocycle should involve average greater training loads than the cycle just completed. Within each mesocycle are several 3 to 6 smaller periods called microcycles, which are typically 1 week. They could last longer, like 10-14 days, depending on their objectives, the runner's time course for adaptation, and the amount of time needed for recovery between workouts. The microcycle is the working unit of the training program. Every microcycle should have its own specific objectives, which is integrated with the objective of the entire mesocycle. Like the movie director, the coach directs the training and prescribes the specific work based on the theme of the scene. Think of the training cycles as a house. The macrocycle is the fully constructed house, the mesocycles are the rooms of the house, and the microcycles are the furniture in each room. One macrocycle house has 2 to 5 mesocycles rooms that have 3 to 6 microcycles furniture in each. Figure 3.1 training cycles compared to training load within a mesocycle. Microcycles can have equivalent training loads, or one of the microcycles can be used as a shock microcycle, during which you increase the training load from that of the previous microcycles. Shock microcycles are followed by a recovery microcycle, during which the volume and intensity, but more so, the volume should decrease, allowing for the reduction of microcycles. The shortest training cycles within each mesocycle that typically last 1 week and consists of the individual training sessions completed in an overall macrocycle. Fatigue. One common theme through the periodization research on both endurance and strength performance is that the decrease in training volume is, at least partly, responsible for the improvement in performance. The volume of training, rather than the intensity, seems to cause the most fatigue and is therefore the variable that needs to be decreased tapered before an increase in training stress and before an important race. I figure 3.12 mesocycles with 4 microcycles, figure 3.13 mesocycles with 5 microcycles in these examples. Microcycles represented by the bars are typically 1 week, but can last up to 10 days. The more microcycles within each mesocycle, the longer the recovery microcycle should be. For example, if you use 3-week mesocycles, the recovery microcycle may need to be at most 1 week. If you use 5-week mesocycles, the recovery microcycle may need to be up to 2 weeks long, since more fatigue will have accumulated from the longer build-up preceding the recovery microcycle. Training loads within each microcycle are the individual workouts or training loads. Using our house metaphor, the training loads workouts are the raw materials used to construct the furniture microcycle. The raw materials are easy runs, long runs, tempo runs, interval workouts, etc. Stimulating loads are used to cause an increase in fitness by increasing the training volume, intensity, or volume of intensity. Maintenance loads maintain an aspect of fitness while focusing on another aspect of fitness. For example, by doing a long run every other week to maintain endurance from your aerobic endurance training phase while you're transitioning to a more specific phase. Because you don't need as large of a training stimulus to maintain fitness as you need to increase fitness, maintenance loads are not as large as stimulating loads, nor do they need to occur as often. By using stimulating and maintenance loads together, you can improve one aspect of fitness without losing another aspect of fitness. Reduced loads are used immediately before an increase in training volume or intensity, or during the tapering period before an important race. Since the training stimulus is reduced, you may experience a slight decrease in fitness. However, you'll experience a greater decrease in fatigue, which is the main purpose of the reduced loads. Any loss in fitness is small when the period of reduced loads is short, such as 1 week or less, and when hard training preceded the period of reduced loads, which will give you longer residual effects. Training loads, the individual workouts or training sessions in a microcycle. Stimulating loads, running workouts used to cause an increase in fitness by increasing the training volume, intensity, or volume of intensity. Maintenance loads, running workouts aim to maintain an aspect of fitness while focusing on another aspect of fitness. Reduced loads, running workouts used immediately before an increase in training volume or intensity, or during the tapering period before an important race. Reverse linear periodization, a training program that begins with higher intensity and progresses to lower intensity and higher volume. Undulating periodization, a training program in which the volume and intensity change from week to week or even from day to day throughout the program. Block periodization, training periodization that concentrates on only a single or a couple compatible abilities at a time using a large volume of workouts, and trains multiple fitness factors consecutively rather than concurrently. Recovery: consider a marathon runner who ran 25 miles a few days before his first marathon so he could feel confident going into the race. Crashing 20 miles into the marathon, he realized that running that long that close to the marathon was a big mistake. 1. Re-establish of homeostasis, during which the body reacts in the immediate minutes and hours after a workout, and 2. Adaptation, during which the body responds to repeated exercise over days, weeks, months, and years. Re-establishment of homeostasis is characterized by many events, including heart rate and body temperature decreases, glucose sparing, elevation off, adoxidation, resynthesis of glycogen and creatine phosphate, reparation of free radical, mediated damage, lactate transport from muscles, restoration of intracellular electrolyte concentrations, and restoration of acid-base balance. Preservation of homeostasis in the face of different stressors is crucial to chronically adapt to training. Adaptation is a complex process involving your DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis. Because adaptation occurs outside of the time spent running, inadequate recovery means inadequate adaptation. The human body is great at adapting to stress, as long as adequate recovery time is given between doses of stress. When not enough recovery follows the stress, exhaustion or injury can result. As little as 3 to 4 weeks of intense training is a pronounced stress response. The continuation of such training increase is the risk of overtraining, or what some prefer to call under-recovery. Although overtraining is an often used term among runners and coaches, the issue is really more about not recovering enough under-recovery rather than about training too much overtraining. elite runners who run more than 100 miles per week, mountain climbers who trek for miles up mountains at extreme altitudes, and Ironman triathletes who train at 3 diverse sports every week and swim, bike, and run nonstop for 140.6 miles on race day, have all proven that the human body can tolerate and adapt to severe physical stress, as long as it is given adequate time to recover from it. Calling overtraining under-recovery is more than simple semantics. It is a difference in perspective, and that different perspective change is your approach to training, encouraging you to place greater emphasis on what happens in between training sessions and between competitive seasons. In regard to both reestablishment of homeostasis and adaptation, time has the biggest effect on recovery. Where you place each workout in a training program matters. If a hard workout is placed during the alarm stage of the general adaptation syndrome, when the body is still in a state of shock from the initial stressor, greater fatigue will result, and it will take longer to recover. If the runner keeps doing workouts before recovery has occurred, he or she will end up in a chronic state of under-recovery, and performance will spiral downward. If, however, workouts are done at the most optimal time following the recovery from the initial stressor, when the body is supercompensating, fitness will spiral upward, and performance will improve. Under-recovery, the inadequate allowance for recovery time between training sessions, which interferes with training adaptation, and, as a result, can contribute to stress and overtraining. Figure 3.14, the GAS principle and supercompensation runners and coach, is almost always planned training using a weekly structure, but that's only because that's the arbitrary form that humans use to schedule their lives, whether because of racing schedules, habits, or even the influence of other runners' social media posts. Runners and coach often get caught up in patterns. Just because there are 7 days in a week doesn't mean you need to plan your training that way, repeating the same type of workout every 7 days. What a coincidence it would be if human biological adaptation occurred in a 7-day pattern, in sync with the weekly calendar. Don't always try to fit the training to a calendar. Instead, fit the training to the runner's needs, his or her timeline of adaptation, and his or her rate of recovery. This requires careful observation, diligence, and the willingness to change. Timing of workouts, the most optimal training program, the one that is going to make runners faster with less risk for injury, includes a correctly timed alternation between stress and recovery. As the figure above shows, the new stressor is introduced too early and before full resistance to the stressor and recovery occurs. If the new stressor were introduced even earlier, during the alarm stage when there is a lot of fatigue, that would only add more fatigue and be even more detrimental to fitness and performance. The most effective adaptations occur when the runner is recovered from previous training and best prepared to tolerate a new stressor. The greater the training stress, the longer the time needed for recovery and adaptation to the stress. When runners finish a long run, a workout, or a race, they are weaker, not stronger. The faster and more complete their recovery, the better they will adapt and the more they will get out of their training and racing. There are several factors that affect how quickly and completely a runner recovers from workouts, including age, training intensity, nutrition, environment, psychological stress, and level of cardiovascular fitness. The most significant of these factors is age. Younger runners recover faster between workouts, enabling them to perform hard workouts more often. Workout intensity is the next biggest factor, with higher intensity workouts requiring longer recovery time. The environment also plays a role in recovery, with altitude and cold weather slowing recovery. Since recovery is an aerobic process, a high level of cardiovascular fitness speeds recovery due to the quicker delivery of nutrients and removal of metabolites by the circulatory system. Nutrition and hydration are also big factors influencing recovery. Recovery strategies in regard to both acute reestablishment of homeostasis and to chronic adaptation. Recovery is a dynamic process that can be manipulated by the runner's actions. Time has the biggest impact on recovery from a workout, a race, a series of workouts, or multi-week training blocks. 24 hours may be enough time after a low-intensity aerobic workout, 2 days for a moderate-intensity aerobic workout or explosive strength workout, and more than 2 days for high-intensity aerobic, anaerobic, glycolytic speed endurance, speed, hypertrophy, and maximal strength workouts. Time notwithstanding, there are several strategies to enhance recovery to try to speed up that time. Refuel. It's oftentimes easy for runners to not refuel or consume nutritional food with the intent to recover the body from activity immediately after a workout. but not refueling after a workout is possibly the single worst thing to do to delay recovery. Refueling after workouts is important for several reasons, including the replenishment of fuel stores and the repair of cellular damage. Carbohydrate is the most important nutrient to replenish after a running workout to replenish glycogen stores in muscles and liver. Glycogen synthesis is a complex biochemical process largely controlled by the hormone insulin and the availability and uptake of glucose from circulating blood. Muscles are a bit fickle when it comes to the time for synthesizing and storing glycogen. Although glycogen will continue to be synthesized until storage in muscles is complete, the process is refuel, consuming nutritional food with the intent to recover the body from activity. Most rapid if carbohydrate is consumed within the first 30 to 60 minutes after running. Indeed, delaying carbohydrate ingestion for just 2 hours after a workout significantly reduces the rate of muscle glycogen resynthesis. To maximize the rate of glycogen synthesis after a hard or long run, runners should consume 0.7 grams of simple carbohydrate sugar, preferably glucose per pound of body weight, within 30 minutes after running and every 2 hours for 4 to 6 hours afterward. If the runner can eat or drink more often, consume 0.4 to 0.6 gram of carbohydrate every 15 to 30 minutes for a few hours. Protein is another important nutrient to consume after hard workouts and long runs to repair the microscopic muscle fiber damage and to provide amino acids for the synthesis of new proteins as part of the adaptation process messenger RNA transcription. Consume 20 to 30 grams of complete protein, those which contain all essential amino acids, within 30 to 60 minutes after running. While some studies have found that consuming protein and carbohydrate together maximize glycogen resynthesis, the total amount of calories consumed is more important than the carbohydrate-protein mix. Since nutrients in fluids are absorbed more quickly than from solid foods, carbohydrate and protein should initially be consumed in a drink following a workout. Despite the many highly advertised commercial sports drinks, any beverage that contains carbohydrate and protein is great for recovery. Several pieces of research have shown that low-fat chocolate milk, which is high in both carbohydrate and protein, is a great post-workout recovery drink. Nutrition also plays a big part in reducing the inflammation that comes with a lot of training. Foods that contain antioxidants like vitamins A, C, and E have anti-inflammatory properties and help muscles recover quicker. Some of the best antioxidant foods for runners include dark chocolate. Chocolate, especially the dark variety, is rich in antioxidants called flavonols. Mixed berries. Blueberries, cherries, blackberries, and raspberries contain a powerful group of antioxidants called anthocyanins, which give the berries their rich colors. Oranges. One orange offers 100% of the recommended daily value of the popular antioxidant, vitamin C. Almonds, nuts, especially almonds, are an excellent source of vitamin E. Eat a small handful of almonds at least 3 to 5 times per week. Sweet potatoes. One average-sized sweet potato offers over 250% of the recommended daily value for vitamin A in the form of beta-carotene, a powerful antioxidant. They're also a good source of vitamin C. Salmon. Salmon is one of the best food sources of omega-3 fatty acids, which help balance the body's inflammation. Stir-fry vegetables. With their mix of red and yellow peppers, onions, bok choy, and soybeans, stir-fry veggies offer a potent mix of antioxidants. Rehydrate water is vital for many chemical reactions that occur inside cells, including the production of energy for muscle contraction. When runners sweat during exercise, they lose body water and salts that can affect cellular processes. In addition, blood volume decreases and becomes thicker if fluids are not replaced. The result is a lower stroke volume amount of blood pumped by the heart per beat, cardiac output amount of blood pumped by the heart per minute, and ultimately, a decreased oxygen delivery to muscles. To rehydrate, runners should drink half a liter per pound of body weight lost during their runs. The best rehydration fluids are those that contain sodium, which stimulates the kidneys to retain water. However, if the run is of a low intensity and lasts less than an hour, plain water in combination with a balanced diet is just as effective. A good indicator of hydration level is urine color, with a light color indicating adequate hydration. On the other hand, if the urine looks like apple juice, drink more water. Rubbing and kneading of the muscles of the body with the hands or a tool with the intent of relieving tension or pain. Table 3.3 Nutrition and Hydration Recommendations Post. Run whether a student, athletes staying up late to write a paper or study for an exam, a busy parent transporting kids to school and then going to work herself, or a coach of busy runners, sleep is easily compromised as people try to balance multiple demands on their time. Seems like few people get enough sleep, and when there's a lot to do, sleep rather than something else is typically sacrificed. However, sleep is the optimal time for the body to heal itself from hard training. Sleep is the recuperative process of the central nervous system, with sleep actively restoring brain physiology to normal levels. Sleep also strongly enhances anabolic building-up processes from secretion of testosterone and growth hormone, and strongly suppresses catabolic breaking-down processes from secretion of cortisol and catecholamines. Lack of sleep, even from sleep that is disrupted in the middle of the night, affects endurance exercise. Lack of sleep is also directly related to injury risk. Massage, including self-massage, myofascial release, and foam rolling, has become a popular recovery method after workouts. However, the research does not entirely justify its popularity, as the effect of massage on recovery is rather small and may even be negligible. Some scientific studies have shown that massage reduces the perception of muscle soreness. If massage is beneficial at all, it seems to have a greater effect on short recovery periods E.G. between races in a track meet rather than on longer recovery periods E.G. between workouts on separate days. Foam rolling and self-massage with a roller device may offer short-term benefits for increasing joint range of motion, attenuating decreases in muscle performance, and reducing the perception of soreness. However, perhaps due to the fact that self-massage E.G. myofascial release only change is the properties of the fascia rather than of the muscle, it is not effective for increasing muscle performance or biomechanical recovery E.G. ground reaction force, power, and leg stiffness. Whether done by a massage therapist or to yourself, massage or foam rolling feels good, which means that any short-term effects of massage may be purely psychological. Since psychology plays an important role in distance running, as it does in other sports, feeling good and relaxed after a massage may be enough to justify its use despite the absence of any measurable physiological benefits. Several other recovery strategies are becoming increasingly popular among runners, including cold water baths and compression socks. Research has shown that these recovery strategies can reduce the runner's perception of soreness after a hard workout, although the effect is less than that of massage. However, they do not seem to significantly reduce muscle damage. Aging.